of Gaza, the real folks in the streets. So there is not just a demonization of a whole people and the sanctification of another people. The Israeli government, overwhelmingly, some Palestinian leaders, less powerfully because they have less power, are acting unjustly and oppressively, and that's where the focus needs to be. BDS demonizes a whole society.
Omar Barghouti, what about the issue one of whether the campaign demonizes an entire society? And also, if you can speak about the similarities that you see between the anti-apartheid campaign, boycott campaign and this one, especially in the situation where states, the existing states in the world, were unable to remedy either the South Africa situation or the current situation in the Middle East.
Okay, there are obvious similarities, but this is not just about similarity between the Israeli apartheid and colonial system and the South African apartheid system. This is about whether Israel is indeed practicing apartheid and colonial rule against the indigenous Palestinians, and it is. And this is according to the UN Convention on the Suppression of the Crime of Apartheid. We don't have to prove that Israel is identical to South Africa to prove that Israel is practicing apartheid. We're saying that it conforms to the UN definition of the system of apartheid. What do we mean by that? Inside Israel proper, forget the occupied Palestinian territories of 1967. Inside Israel, there are two systems of laws, one applying to its Jewish citizens, who are also nationals, and another applying to its non-Jewish citizens. So there's clear discrimination. Even the U.S. State Department, in its annual human rights reports, accuses Israel of institutionalized legal and societal discrimination against the Palestinian Arab citizens of the State of Israel. So how do we end occupation, apartheid, as well as denial of refugee rights? It's through boycott, divestment, and sanctions as an empowering tool that can have the masses, that can have the social movement acting to change U.S. policy exactly as we did, and I was in the anti-apartheid movement in the South African case, as we did against South African apartheid. Of course, there's complicity from Western governments, but so was the case in the South African apartheid case. And companies and institutions. The most important way to challenge this system of complicity and to challenge Israel's impunity and exceptionalism, Israel is put on a pedestal and it's not treated like the rest of the world when it comes to its violations of human rights and international law. We need to take it down from that pedestal and treat it like every other offender, every other system that creates such injustices. This is not about demonizing Israel as in an abstract term. What BDS is delegitimizing racism, apartheid, and colonial rule. Exactly what BDS in the South African case was delegitimizing. It was not delegitimizing white people or Christians. It was delegitimizing apartheid. So this is what we're against. We've never come out and said we're against this or that group of people based on their identity. We're against Israeli apartheid and colonialism. We couldn't care less if Israel were a Jewish state, Catholic state, or Muslim state. So long as it's oppressing us, we will continue to resist it. And BDS is a very nonviolent and effective form of resistance. It is growing tremendously. No one can speak on behalf of the Jews of the world as if they're all in one basket. I think that's completely inappropriate. There are many Jewish groups that do support the BDS movement, including inside Israel, including in this country. And increasingly in Western Europe, many Jewish groups are joining the BDS movement because they see it as one that's very morally consistent. It's based on international law and universal human rights. It does not distinguish between people based on their identity as the Israeli system does. Second, the Israeli state is not standing alone in space. It is completely supported by the institutions of the State of Israel, including academic and cultural institutions. No amount of rebranding and dance groups and music and poetry can cover up Israel's apartheid and colonial system. So this rebranding effort is exactly unethical because it's trying to whitewash this system of oppression. And the last point I want to mention is that it's a very opportune time to debate this at a time when the University of California students are striking against the incredible rise in the tuition fees and the privatization, so to speak, from the back door of college education in this country. Why should the University of California raise the fees by 32% while Israel is receiving from the United States more than $5.6 billion a year in military aid as well as other forms of aid? Why should Israel, an apartheid and colonial system, continue to receive this huge subsidy, tens of billions of dollars over the years of the occupation and apartheid, while the health system, education system, infrastructure in this country are crumbling, and private education, college education, is again becoming a privilege of the rich? Education should be available to everyone, and to do that, we really need to address where the priorities are in U.S. funding.
Omar Barghouti, what about Rabbi Waskow's point that it matters less to target Israel? It's the United States that's the real power in this situation, and it's huge support for Israel. And also, in your BDS movement, which companies would you be targeting?
Okay, but precisely because it's the U.S. that's the sponsor of Israeli oppression and apartheid, we are indeed trying to change U.S. policy. The issue is how to do that. We have the South African precedent, a very good lesson to learn from, that this is the way of changing policy in the U.S. It's not through begging. It's not through writing letters to Obama that he would ignore. It's through mass movement, social movement at the grassroots level, students and churches and unions and women's groups and feminists and so on, all of them acting together on a platform that's anti-racist, progressive, and wants to end injustice. So I think this is the point, that we have to act from the grassroots up to pressure and change. The companies, your second question is what companies we do target in the BDS movement. It varies. BDS is not a one-size-that-fits-all. It's context-sensitive. In every situation, we target companies that are complicit in Israel's apartheid and occupation that we can win our battle against. So in the U.S., many American military companies are being targeted. In Sweden, a French company was targeted. In Britain, and so on and so forth. So it's Israeli companies as well as international companies that are complicit in Israel's apartheid and occupation.
Rabbi Waskow, your response?
Well, first of all, it's interesting that Mr. Barghouti focuses on the certainly unreasonable military aid the United States gives to Israel, and by the way, to Egypt as well, as the problem for the University of California, when in fact 10 or 20 or 30 times that amount of money is being spent on the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's where the huge amounts of money that should be going to American schools, universities, infrastructure ought to be coming from. And by that standard, it's a dangerous and poisonous drop in the bucket, but it is a drop in the bucket, the aid to Israel and to Egypt with military aid to them. The big question in American society ought to be the overwhelming distortion involved in the massive wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.